Hey everyone, my name is Joshua Kirk from LumEd, and this is the LumEd podcast, episode number 7. Today it's my huge privilege to be introducing our guest for the show. 2 weeks ago, Tim sat down with Daniel Flynn from Thankyou to chat to him about all the good work that he is doing with the Thankyou brand and also just how it's been for him over the last 6 weeks. Daniel is a weapon. He's an amazing creative mind. He's also a very, very inspirational leader. And he has grown this brand called Thankyou to be a global powerhouse in helping to solve the world's poverty issues. It's essentially taking the consumerism from the Western world, where we spend a lot of money on a lot of things that we don't actually need, and using the profit from that exchange and distributing that to the people around the world that need it most. Now, Daniel and the Thankyou story is a huge inspiration to us here at LumEd. 2 weeks ago, Tim sat down with Daniel to chat a bit online while we were still in lockdown, and we've left that conversation largely unedited because there's so many gold nuggets for you in that. So grab a coffee, sit back and enjoy the conversation with Daniel Flynn.
Well, Daniel, mate, thank you so much for coming on the show, giving up your time to chat with us. Is it this morning? It's this morning over there. It's still this morning over here in New Zealand. With a business model that essentially requires people to spend, and when people are reduced to spending, in some sense, how has that affected you guys? And what do you think how have you kind of readjusted your strategy to look forward to the next season?
Yeah, it's well, look, first up, it's great to be here. Funny circumstances, that we kind of the world finds himself in. But I'm hoping, sure we all are, that this is a moment where we can all stop and reflect, and like almost rethink the future. And that's certainly been the Thankyou story. We had our own kind of crisis before COVID, so. We haven't talked too much about it publicly yet, but essentially we had a whole bunch of financial issues hit early this year. It was a customer, there was a pricing issue, and it was like there was a decimal point wrong in a pricing over a product for a long period of time. The claim was for like $770,000 payable that week. But what? Wow. And so we had like that issue, and then another issue, and another issue, and another. And so we were in a really like managing through crisis kind of mode. And that was really challenging. But through that, we were able to make some pretty big adjustments, really talk to, the team about the way forward is back to startup. It is back to lean, speed, budgets aren't what they were. Like it was almost like going back to what built us. And that was just in time because then COVID hit, which was a really interesting phenomenon because we're obviously in the hand sanitizer business, amongst other products. So some of our products have dropped because people aren't spending as much, but then others, were panic buying initially, and if you followed anything in the sanitizer world, I mean, that just, they're talking about like 20 years of growth, in a day. Like it just exploded. What's interesting though is that sales grew, so 3-4 times, probably 10 times in some SKUs or some lines we have, but then supply chain wasn't ready. So that fell apart in many levels. We had one point in March, sorry, we had our production was at something like 38% of original forecasts. So we can't even produce what we needed to produce before COVID hit, let alone the demand. And that was frustrating. But not just that, I mean, it was super challenging because we were already at our weakest financial point in Thankyou's history. And that is such a tough place to be in. So really financial point. We run a lean model. We commit and give our profits to helping end extreme poverty. It's an amazing consumer story. It is the foundation, the purpose of why we exist. However, it does create a challenge because from a business perspective, you're taking cash out of the business, and it's going to a very noble thing. But essentially, every time you do that, you're weakening the financial strength of the business, and that's our business model to continue to, So anyway, it made it really challenging coming into COVID. But, massive credit to the team. And I think our values and culture around solutions focused. That is one of our core values that has come to play every day, every single day of the last couple of months. And we were able to find some new suppliers overseas who had capacity. Teams turned around new product within hours, and it was just to see the kind of resolve people had. That was a twofold resolve. How do we get sanitizer to people, like consumers, but also the profits to the world's poor? And we are seeing, as some of the listeners may be seeing, you do have to look a bit deeper at the moment, just because news cycles are filled with almost what's happening in everyone's own country versus what we're seeing in developing countries, which is really intense. There are some forward projections that are shocking, that 500 million people will go back into extreme poverty. That's sort of the worst case. There's sort of a whole bunch of different hypotheses, but what we do know today is that I think I read a report yesterday that the UN World Food Programme have just stated 36 countries have just entered famine level.
Oh man.
So 36 countries into famine. There's a study that just came out of Bangladesh showing reduction in income, averaging 75%. 4 out of 10 respondents had 3 days of food left at home. And it's bad. And then if you think about the frontline responders to these crises and issues, charities, and they are not getting funded or funding. Everyone's sort of pulling back. And it makes sense why people are pulling back. But the challenge is charities are cutting half their staff, more than half their staff. They're pulling people out of countries so they're in their storm while the world's in a bigger storm. And I think at Thankyou, I mention all of that to say we sit here feeling a weight, to be honest, both a heaviness and a hope. The heaviness for this is bad, like even separating, if we could for a moment, the pandemic itself, the actual on-flow effect of stopping the machine, stopping the world, is a huge economic reality for the world's poorest, and they will pay the most for this. And so we feel the weight of that, but then we see this hope as, we haven't released the numbers yet. We've got to wait till the end of financial year, which is 2 months off. But this is looking now, what was our worst financial year ever has now turned around with the work of new suppliers and new products and a whole bunch of stuff to our single most profitable year ever.
Oh my
goodness. Not only that, if this stuff lands, we may be talking about profit numbers. I always get excited. You kind of have to wait till it's in the bank. But the way it's looking, this could be more profitable than many, many, many years, if not all of them combined. Like it's off the charts for us. And we think that's really important because, our partners overseas need funding more than ever. And it's kind of shown us that Thankyou, this model, it works. And when it works, we've got to take it further. So in my very long answer to your short question,
that's incredibly inspiring in terms of being able to get a turnaround story like that in such a season as this. The Thankyou story is all about eradicating poverty, eradicating poverty, full stop. And as you just mentioned, obviously poverty is rising, so you guys have essentially more of a burden to be able to, step up even more, and to see those profits rise means that you can throw more resources at doing that. When we met back in Wellington for the launch of Thankyou in New Zealand, the Thankyou story started through bottled water and providing clean water into towns and villages that didn't have clean water, and then you've gone obviously into, as you mentioned, the sanitary sort of range. Are you still sort of working in those two funnels, or is it primarily in one?
Yeah, so primarily it is we term it personal care, so hand wash, lotions, body washes. That's the range. So in New Zealand, that's the only range available. We also have a baby range, so nappies and baby care products, um, which we have as well. Water for us is we didn't even launch it in New Zealand, and it's sort of on a plane in Australia to kind of pivot massively from where it started. I think the whole Thankyou mission is really at its core. We just see this simple transfer of wealth from the consumer choice. Like that's really the moment we're interested in. We care less about the product, although the product has to be really good, right? So what product category it is, I mean, we've something about Thankyou, once you see it, you sort of can't unsee the thought of this could be anything, and I think we're really honed in on how do we transfer that well. So a consumer choice can fundamentally right or wrong kind of a darkness that shouldn't exist in the world, and that is extreme poverty. That is the fact that people don't have access to basic human rights, water or food. So yeah, I think our future is sort of, we think, quite broad. But one of the keys to the whole model working, there's a great quote on our wall of our office that we haven't been in for months, and who knows if we'll ever go back. But in there it said, um, rule number one, make great product. Rule number two, never break rule one. And then there's an asterisk on that says never use a good cause to sell an average product. And that really speaks to the heart of what we try and do. And hopefully anyone who's bought the product or one day does has a really good consumer product experience. Like we're a product company first, but the reason we exist is for humanity. And I think that's the model. And yeah, New Zealand was a really, big step. I mean, some were like, it's a small step. You realize there's less people in New Zealand, and they're giving me like different states of Australia. And I'm like, yeah, sure. But it's a massive step for us because it was our first step of taking Thankyou into a new country. And, that is not an easy process, as we learn.
Yeah. Well, let's dive into that and unpackage that a little bit. So you launched in Australia through bottled water. You branched out into the sanitary range, and that grew and grew. But you realised that to totally decimate poverty, you needed to obviously scale. And one of the ways of doing that is jumping in the ditch and coming into New Zealand and partnering with us. So that was coming up 2 years ago when you launched. What was that journey like for you? Coming into New Zealand, we're a similar culture, but we have our differences. What happened through that journey in launching in New Zealand?
You use the word partnership, like partnering with New Zealand. Our approach to the launch in New Zealand wasn't the approach that I've seen many companies take, which is like, well, let's just send a pallet of product, to the Kiwis, and we'll just send it off, and yeah, then we're in New Zealand. We took a different approach. We've always believed that Thankyou isn't an Australian company. It's not a New Zealand company. It's an idea, and it's global. It so happened to start in Australia, but for us, New Zealand was the test of, could this work in another country? And we approached it as if it was America or Germany or anywhere. Like it was how do we refine the model? New Zealand's a very interesting country from our perspective. The more we learnt and kind of researched it, it is actually crazy the number of global brands that test new products and ideas in New Zealand. Like we were like, man, this is fascinating. And I think one of the first observations coming into New Zealand was I was surprised at how high the product game is and the innovation is. And I think it's in part because New Zealand's a small nation. So when you make a product, a lot of your thinkers and innovators are actually thinking about how does this land for the US, for China, for Australia, not just New Zealand itself, because it is a small market to sustain a business or an idea. And so there's already that kind of global view. And I mean, all we have to do is walk down an Australian supermarket shelf and realize there is a real difference. I actually think Australia is big enough to kind of have average ideas that work. But I don't think an average idea works in New Zealand. And so you have a lot of brands testing there. But I think the New Zealand culture it's a very interesting culture. I mean, you guys are the first you probably locked down the hardest during COVID, but have also been the first to really get through it, or you're kind of leading the world. Again, it feels like, gun reform or Jacinda Ardern did. It's like, this feels like a lot of people around the world were like, this is amazing leadership and look what's happening. But because Justine and I lived in New Zealand for a year and a half or nearly 2 years, we're like, this makes sense. This doesn't feel strange. And so Thankyou coming to New Zealand was, a small but giant leap for us. And it helped us refine who we are, what works, what doesn't work. For us, I think we had different internal models on how we'll structure teams to focus on new countries and, manage the existing business. And that didn't quite work at all, actually. So we had to refine that, and we had to rethink, cool, well, if we take this to 4 or 5 countries next, or whatever comes next, like, are we really set up? We thought we were set up for New Zealand, but actually Australia started to get the speed wobbles while we were focusing on here. So we had to really rethink that. That was really big. I think, for Justine and I, we also co-founders, were married. We had literally burnt out. It's the simplest way to put it. I mean, you met us in Wellington. I reckon we're pretty tired. I was putting on a brave smile. We'd just come off the back of 10 years of growing this company in Australia. And those that have followed the story, it is a wild ride. And so 3 months out from the New Zealand launch, Justine had some health challenges. The doctors are like, you need to take 3 months off. And we were laughing. We're like, so Justine was leading the New Zealand launch. Like, what does off even look like? But she literally had to. And as soon as she stopped, her body stopped, and she slept for 3 months. She literally was in bed all day, every day. Massive adrenal fatigue issues, a whole bunch of health challenges. So that was the 3-month lead up to launch. So then I was kind of taking on more things and trying to balance back in Aussie, and I was flying weekly back and forward. And then I basically burnt out halfway through after the New Zealand launch. I kind of just hit a wall, and we had 2 months off everything after 10 years. And that was in New Zealand. We spent time down in Queenstown. One of the things that blew us away about Kiwi culture is people so kindly opened up their batches. They're like, oh, hey, stay here or stay there. And we had 2 months of just staying in different people's houses, and we reset and we rethought our own life personally and then the business. And I don't think we'll ever, I don't know if we'll ever get a time like that again. It was such a nexus point of the whole Thankyou story. And in that, we got to rethink the future and critically analyze, to be honest, what hasn't worked in Australia. And then even what didn't work with the launch. And, our launch into New Zealand was amazing. On a graph, it looks like that. And we're all like, oh, this is one of our best launches. But then the competition went pretty hard. Global, multinationals, local, and then so the launch data starts to look like this. But in Australia, it doesn't. It goes up and up and up. And so we started to dig into how and why, and the insights were pretty incredible.
Obviously, you mentioned through socials, you took a bit of a sabbatical through that time, just kind of recharge and refocus. So, man, what a time to be able to do that, and do that now before the season that we're currently in, and it's obviously paying off. You mentioned that the data is looking slightly different compared to New Zealand and Australia. How is it looking in New Zealand currently?
So, look, we are probably half of what we were at launch, which I can tell you right now, that was not the plan. And that is not, in our view, that's not a success. That's like, like that is, it needs to go from strength to strength to strength. I mean, if you're in a fast moving industry like consumer goods, if you're not in growth, you're dying. And it's just how quick are you dying? So it's a bit of a morbid view, but it is the reality. But the data for the New Zealand launch almost mirrored a launch we did in Australia just before New Zealand, which was the launch into the baby category.
Yep.
It was our most successful launch we'd ever done. And it just, I mean, we had 10% market share in nappies in Australia in the subcategory we were in the first 3 months. Now, traditionally nappies is like, it's almost impossible to get people to make the switch. For context, Australia has Huggies, and that is like the number one dominant brand. P&G globally own a brand called Pampers. Pampers has failed every single launch into Australia because Huggies protects its shelf space well, plays the game very well. So we were heading into a space that essentially the biggest brand in the world has failed, and we go in with 10% market share, and it was electric. We were probably of the view like, Thankyou is the most unstoppable force ever. And then it was like 1,000 ton of bricks just came down on us. I was speaking to someone in the industry and they said, 10% actually is an interesting level because when a new entrant hits it, for any big kind of multinational, it sends alarm bells, right? Because it's sort of like this thing actually has potential. Like it is a threat versus, like nice marketing. And so I kind of can imagine in their office, maybe alarms went off. I don't know, but I can tell you that what happened for the next 2 years was a battle that we completely lost. I mean, we're still on shelf today, but we're a shadow of what we once were in the nappy category. That's different to our hand wash, still the number one hand wash in Australia, the personal care range with the number one Australian brand. We were able to get in a category that has 5 bigger players. We were able to sort of, I think we snuck our way in at Thankyou. What was different in nappies is the bigger brands, one of the biggest levers they can pull is discounting, deep discounting. So Huggies goes on promotion to half price, more regular. I think there was some numbers we saw of their promotions went up from 17 weeks a year to 33 weeks a year. Like it was just game on. And so our launch into nappies was epic. And then it just... And it kind of dropped, and the pressure, the pricing pressure, the market pressure, even the number 2 brand followed. And so anyway, in short, really, really challenging. Then we launched into New Zealand, and I think our hope was that was an anomaly. And yet the New Zealand launch was the same. Huge launch, our most successful launch in personal care we'd ever had. Our first 13 weeks are incredible. And then the pressure, the pricing, the discounting from multiple brands, across the country. And that's fine. Like it's not, I was telling someone, it's not like at a human level, any of the competitors don't like the mission we're on. Like I've met actually a lot of them in New Zealand, in Australia, around the world. At a human level, I think they're like, we like Thankyou, the mission. But at a commercial level, it's the job to protect market shelf and space and ultimately crush what we do. So commercial level, different to human level. One of the former CEOs of probably one of the biggest global FMCG companies that operate in Australia and New Zealand, he said to me, Daniel, like, don't take it the wrong way, but when you first started, like, it's like we didn't see you as a threat. And he was sort of using the royal industry we. He's like, it's a cool idea. But then you started to get more and more traction and some really good results. So it would make sense now that you guys are handled differently when you launch stuff. And that's probably something that we never really thought would happen. Or like, could the strength of the system squash a movement? Like, because our history hadn't told us that. But these 2 launches showed us, wow, the strength of the system to crush an idea that has all the potential and has a lot of the fundamentals right, but just the sheer weight of that. And Thankyou is not a, we don't have $100 million of investor fundings or 10 million or even $1 just to just pump into growth. And so that's our reality. It's like, I mean, you could take both of the data set, and that's like 4 years of our life's work, man. That's like blood, sweat, and tears. That's a lot of smart people, a lot of great partners. You guys, everyone working for 4 years on a baby launch, on a New Zealand launch, to kind of have kind of some pretty tough results. Like not total failure, just really tough results. And it would kind of beg the question, well, should Thankyou even go further? And the further we go, the bigger the threat we are, the more pressure that comes. This is kind of like, it's either a doomed model or maybe it's time to pivot in a way that doesn't just keep joining the system, but dares to challenge the whole system. And without sort of giving too much away, I mean, that is the camp you find us in at Thankyou. It is the what if we took it to the whole system? And so we've spent the last 2 years working on that question and that thought. And we're working every day on that. We're kind of running the core business. And as you heard, we've had some great sales and profits are back up, which is a great short-term win due to panic buying and due to all the things. But actually, we're starting to think about what is this long-term thing that I don't think we'd ever have learnt unless we took the time going to New Zealand and doing it the right way, like going all in. So yeah, man, it's a crazy journey.
We're going to jump into a question there from JK. I'm just going to quickly reset my camera here. One sec. So just want to, I'll read it out. So firstly, you're an incredible leader in the midst of this challenging time with the recent stats coming out about increase in poverty around the world. Given the economic decline, how do you manage your own personal well-being, stress, anxiety, etc.? And how do you inspire, lead a team through uncharted territory when you don't have a blueprint?
That is a solid question. That's a solid question. I think, I think I was driving in the car to work kind of before we went into lockdown. And Justine and I were both just talking through the messaging to the team and how we lead through this crisis, off the back of our own crisis that we were all, to be honest, pretty tired from. And she said this line, and I don't want to steal it, but she said it, and I was just like, whoa. She's like, hope is the antidote to uncertainty.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, it's probably someone said it somewhere, but it just sort of flowed out. And I was like, yeah. And we unpacked that a bit. And I think, like, some of us can view hope as this sort of fluffy, wishy-washy thing. That's not the hope. That's the antidote to uncertainty. It's the hope that goes deeper, the stuff that goes, at its core, innovation is born in moments like this. Do you know what I mean? Like, the stories that inspire me are the stories of, was it Isaac Newton through the plague? Yeah, like So like it's these like in hardship. And if I actually look at our own story, it is in hardship and it is in the crushing that we were made. And so part of our leadership journey has just been pointing to the past to go both historically and in our own story. It's the crushing that makes us. It's the crushing that refines us. Yeah, it's a hard process to hear when you're being crushed. I think we all love the story at the end. So when you can kind of get up on a stage and be like, yeah, so that happened, but now we've succeeded, and everyone's like, that's amazing. But it's during it. I think leadership is made and broken in the process. And our role as leaders of organizations, of families, of our community is to kind of stick our head above the noise and to look backwards and forwards and just start connecting dots. And when we look backwards, we see challenges, but that's where innovation's been born. When we look forwards, we see, huge challenges, but also huge opportunity. Like, I think, okay, you guys are in Nelson, and that's a long way from the world, except now COVID hit, the world just realized you can Zoom, you can Skype. So all of a sudden, San Francisco is not even a flight away. It's a moment away. I mean, I had a Zoom this morning with a guy in LA that usually when we meet, it's like it's worth booking the flight, and it's like it's a big deal. We're just Zooming. He's like, hey, let's connect later in the week. I'm like, let's do that. And like life before that was different. And so we're seeing threads of this. I think to the question on anxiety and stress, it's real. I think for leaders, leadership is an interesting journey. It is a lonely journey. They say the CEO is the loneliest job on the planet, which is the bizarre paradox of the person who seems to be surrounded by everyone and yet almost can't talk to anyone. And so, that's a real reality. I was kind of figured that out very early on in the journey. And so amongst the heaviness of this and the hope, there is that reality check on you're not unbreakable, you're not superhuman, you are very human. And in that, we have to like actually relax a bit, rest. One of the more insightful social media things someone posted online, Justine was sharing it, and it said something like, if you're not learning a new language, if you're not learning a new skill, if you're not improving your health and fitness, that's okay. Yeah. It was a neurosurgeon. She was basically saying, like, we are going through we're in shock. This is like, some people, yes, they are taking the moment to learn a new language. It's okay if you are just surviving. It is okay if you are just making it through. That is the win. And so, like, that for me is a real true belief for me, for our family, for anyone listening. It's like, just surviving is a win. The fact that you're still here, for some people, that's a big deal. And that's the win, And so if that's a base level, you start layering on top of that, other things we can do, like having conversations with people, being open, not carrying the weight yourself. But for me, I've kind of got that in mentors, in even just Justine and I, we walk together. We don't walk alone in this. And that's a real powerful thing. There's an old proverb that says, one can put 1,000 to flight, two can put 10,000. And while I don't really fully understand the analogy of putting 10,000 people to flight, I love the exponential reality of that. Like, because I would have thought that two could put 2,000, but it's actually exponential, and that is what multiplication is. And so we can't walk alone as leaders, as individuals, but never forget hope. Hope is, like what Justine said there, in the antidote, to these uncertain times.
What specifically has been the message of hope that you've been able to provide to your team, where I'm sure a lot of them are seeing the stats, they're seeing what's going on around the world, they know the reality of what's going on. What is the message of hope that supersedes everything that they see going on around them, that they can go, yep, I believe this, we're going to get through this?
Yeah, look, it's a hard one, because I think this is a challenge that the world has never faced on so many levels. We have faced challenges. Look, certainly in our lifetime, in our generation, and many younger people, it's just, it's unthinkable where we're at. And so the watch out is to sort of, even for us, to be like, it'll be okay. Like, like some little cheesy line. It's got to go deeper than that.
Yeah.
We find hope in the little wins. We started this thing on the Thankyou social accounts, where we kind of just paused all product marketing and the beautiful imagery and the shots we do. We're just like, you know what? Thankyou is for people. And what do we have in our hand? We have profits that will go to partners and helping make a difference, but we have a platform. That's for humanity, not for us. And so we just started kind of hunting for hope, was what we were calling it. We're just like, we're going to look for stories of hope, big stories, but like, to be honest, we're featuring more little stories, little wins in the community, little wins, little or other organizations doing stuff. I think hope is found in the little glimmers of hope. It's a glimmer. It's like a little light. It's a little thing, and so we've been highlighting that on social to kind of just say, hey, look what's happening here, and look what others are doing, and look how we're getting through this together. Look at the incredible, inspiring work of the frontline workers. Look at some of the innovations coming forward, and then internally there is a message around, like, we have a job to do, and it's an important job. Like, we have to get sanitizer to people, and that's an honor, and then we have to get profits to the world's poorest, and that's a duty and an honor as well. And so there is just a real, we must keep going, and we must move forward, and there's too much on the line not to. And whilst that message may in smooth sailing not be very inspiring, I think to any business and leader right now, to keep going is actually a very inspiring and hopeful message, because not everyone's able to keep going. Do you know what I mean? And so it's important that businesses stay afloat, that businesses thrive, that people move forward. I mean, you guys got a team of 6, that's 6 families and 6 livelihoods, and all the interconnected charities they support and community groups that they're part of. And if we were to map out the impact of a business or an individual, it's epic. And so to keep going at a time where everything in the world is shouting at you to stop and give up, I think that's an important message of hope.
Yeah, man, it's something that I love about the Thankyou brand is that you're at the very core, you're radically changing people's lives. And whether that's people who are involved in simply that they could be buying the Thankyou product, they might be involved along the journey, but right at the very end of the line is the people who are getting clean water in their villages, or the sanitary process means that they actually have access to sanitizers and hygiene. So to have that as the very core of Thankyou, it's such a compelling driver to be able to stay focused, stay on task, because essentially if any of the employees don't do their job, or Thankyou decides to close its doors, lives are at stake, and changing the world's not easy. You've chosen one of the hardest I think and most ambitious tasks anyone could possibly dream of, and that's to change the world. It's a call out to anyone who's watching this. If you want to make a change during the season, if you want to put your money somewhere where you know that it's going to actually make a difference, jump on Thankyou products whenever you're doing your shop. Grab one for a friend as well, and tell them about the story. You can find the story on the tell2.co.nz about Thankyou and where all the products go. But we all have a responsibility to look out for one another. And one thing I love through the season, a positive spin on what's happened through this lockdown, is that there's been this strange sense of connectedness. Like you just said, you usually fly to LA to catch up with a friend through Zoom. But this world of the digital has been able to connect us somewhat more. Is there anything that we haven't necessarily touched on that you feel that you could speak to listeners, provide some encouragement, or even if it's just to how we can help you as Thankyou?
You mentioned there's a lot of different listeners on in the creative space and in business, and something I read that was very helpful to me, and certainly Thankyou very early on in COVID, was an article that came out of a group in New York, I think Praxis Labs. But anyway, this article just said, and it was a podcast and an article, but it stuck with me. So that when COVID first happened, we all thought, probably particularly in America, that it was going to be a blizzard. Blizzards go for like 3 days, 4 days. You go inside, you come out, everything is as it was. Bit of snow on it maybe, but that's a blizzard. But we very quickly realized it's not a blizzard, it's a season. Seasons go for months. You go inside, you have to change how you operate. the world changes in winter. It kind of starts to get colder and things are slower and shut down. But, you come out of a season, 3 months. Their challenge to business leaders, and I took the challenge, was this may not be a season. This might be, and they referred to the little ice age that happened back in 1817. Went for a year, changed the world. It was icy every day. There was no summer. And so there was a massive rethink, and both at a climate level and at a human level, it changed the world. And the world had to change. So they said, this may not be the little ice age, but what if it was? Are you ready? Are you thinking? Are you starting to look forward? And I think there's a part of human nature that doesn't want to comprehend that. So we kind of like, no. We're all coming. We're at level 3, not level 4. This thing's sweet. We're good. Right? And that's because we have this, at times, optimism bias, and it's not a bad thing. We got to keep that. But I think the challenge, I've certainly just gone, okay, yes, keep the optimism bias, but also just like, if it is that, how are we changing? How are we pivoting? What are we doing that is a long-term play? And so I think the challenge is for us to all think about the long term, and look, maybe it's not that big. Cool. We had some moments of thinking about long term, and that's probably healthy anyway. So that's probably my final thought, that something that's really shaped my last few weeks and months.
Mate, your time is very precious, and we have very much valued it so much. Just want to thank you for letting us be a part of the journey back 2 years ago, being able to help you out with the website and come up to the launch in Wellington. You guys will always be an inspiration for how you guys do business, but how you're literally changing the world. But yeah, we wish you well, mate. Thank you so much for your time.
So there you have it, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that conversation. If you want to hear more about Thankyou, head over to thankyou.co.nz to read all about the organisation and the good work that they're doing around the world. And most importantly, keep an eye out for the Thankyou products on your shelves next time you are in the supermarket. So that's it from us for episode number 7 of the LumEd podcast. We'll be back with another episode in a week or so. For now, keep safe, and we'll see you in the next one.